She walked out of the mansion with nothing but the clothes on her back, leaving behind a life of luxury most people could only dream of. But what Grace Williams left in that penthouse wasn't money, jewelry, or expensive gifts. It was something so powerful, so unexpected, that it would bring one of New York's most ruthless business moguls to his knees, tears streaming down his face for the first time in decades. This is the story of how a simple African nanny from Ghana, hired to care for the children of billionaire real estate tycoon Omar Hassan, discovered a truth so devastating that she couldn't stay silent. And when she finally walked away, what she left behind would shatter everything this powerful man thought he knew about love, family, and the price of success. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you believe about the walls we build around our hearts and prove that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected sources. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The employment agency in Manhattan had never seen anything like it. Mr. Omar Hassan, CEO of Hassan Global Properties and one of the wealthiest men in America, had personally requested to interview every single nanny candidate himself. Not his assistants, not his house manager. Him. This was a man who owned skyscrapers across 3 continents, whose signature was worth more than most people's lifetime earnings, who hadn't conducted a job interview in over 15 years. Yet there he sat in his corner office on the 47th floor, reviewing applications for a childcare position. Grace Williams wasn't what anyone expected when she walked into that gleaming tower of glass and steel. At 42, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her graying hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing her best dress, a modest navy blue outfit she'd saved for months to buy. She had no fancy credentials, no references from celebrity families, no training from elite European nanny schools. What she had was 20 years of experience raising other people's children, while her own 3 kids grew up back in Accra, supported by the money she sent home each month. She had calloused hands from years of work, eyes that had seen both heartbreak and hope, and a voice that could soothe a crying child in 4 different languages. Omar Hassan studied her across his mahogany desk, his dark eyes unreadable. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 45, with silver streaking his black hair and the kind of sharp features that belonged on magazine covers. His suit probably cost more than Grace made in 6 months. "Tell me about your children," he said suddenly, surprising her. Grace's face softened. "I have 3, sir. Sarah is 22 now, studying medicine. Michael is 19, in university for engineering. And my youngest, David, is 16. They're good children." "You left them to come here?" "I left them to build their future, sir." Sometimes love means sacrifice. Something flickered in Omar's expression, pain perhaps, or recognition. He was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Why do you want this job?" Grace straightened. "Because children deserve to be seen, sir." Not just watched. Seen. 3 days later, she was moving into the staff quarters of the most expensive penthouse in Manhattan. The Hassan residence occupied the top 3 floors of a luxury building overlooking Central Park. Everything was white marble and gold fixtures, imported Italian furniture and crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses. It was beautiful, intimidating, and utterly silent. Grace met the children on her first morning. Emma, age 8, sat at a breakfast table that could seat 12, picking at fresh berries arranged like artwork on bone china. She was a beautiful child with long dark hair and her father's intelligent eyes, but she ate alone, surrounded by luxury and empty chairs. 7-year-old Lucas was in the playroom, building elaborate structures with expensive wooden blocks, while a housekeeper cleaned. Around him, He looked up when Grace entered, studied her with the serious expression of a child who'd learned not to expect much from adults. "Are you the new nanny?" Emma asked when Grace introduced herself. "I'm Grace. I'm here to take care of you." "The last one left after 2 months," Lucas said matter-of-factly. "Before that, one lasted 3 months. The one before that was fired." Grace knelt down to their level. "Well, I'm not going anywhere unless you want me to." Emma tilted her head. "Everyone leaves." It was a statement that held more weight than any 8-year-old should carry. That first week, Grace observed. She watched how the children moved through their perfectly ordered world like ghosts, how they ate gourmet meals in silence, how they attended the finest private school but came home to empty rooms. She watched how Omar Hassan barely spoke to them, leaving notes with schedules and instructions, treating parenthood like another business to manage efficiently. The children were polite, well-behaved, and utterly starved for attention. Emma excelled at piano but played to empty rooms. Lucas could speak 3 languages but had no one to practice with. They had everything money could buy and nothing their hearts needed. Grace began small. She started eating breakfast with them instead of standing silently in the corner. She asked about their school days, their friends, their dreams. She read them bedtime stories, using different voices for each character, until they giggled. She taught them card games her own children had loved, simple pleasures that had nothing to do with expense accounts or social status. "Why do you sit with us?" Emma asked one evening as Grace helped her with homework. "Because I like your company," Grace replied simply. "Really? Really?" It was the first time Grace had seen the little girl smile. But it was during the second week that Grace began to understand the deeper sadness that permeated the Hassan home. While organizing Lucas's room, she found a photograph tucked under his mattress, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, holding both children when they were much younger. When she asked Lucas about it, his face crumpled. "That's Mama. Daddy says we're not supposed to talk about her." "Why not?" "Because it makes him angry. She went to heaven when I was 4. But Daddy took away all her pictures and said we have to be strong and not cry about it." Grace's heart broke. These children weren't just missing a mother. They'd been forbidden to grieve her, to remember her, to speak her name. Omar Hassan, in his determination to protect his children from pain, had stolen their right to heal. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She thought about her own children, how she'd held them through every sadness, every fear, every loss. She thought about the photograph hidden under a 7-year-old's mattress like contraband. She thought about Emma's guarded smile and Lucas's careful words, and she began to understand that her job here wasn't just about childcare. It was about healing a family that had forgotten how to love openly, how to grieve honestly, how to be human in the face of loss. The question was, would Omar Hassan let her help, or would she become just another nanny who didn't work out when she dared to care too much? As Grace finally drifted off to sleep in her comfortable but lonely staff room, she made a silent promise. These children would know they were loved, seen, and worthy of happiness. Whatever it cost her, whatever battles she had to fight, she would not let them disappear into the cold perfection of their father's world. She had no idea that her promise would lead to discoveries that would change everything, not just for Emma and Lucas, but for their father, who had built walls so high around his heart that he'd forgotten what it felt like to truly live. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into Grace's employment on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Emma caught a cold and had to stay home from school. Grace was preparing soup in the kitchen when she heard something she'd never heard before in the Hassan penthouse. The sound of a child crying, not the careful, muffled sobs she'd occasionally heard through bedroom doors, but real, heartbroken weeping. Grace found Emma in the library, standing before a built-in bookshelf, her small hands pressed against what looked like a solid wall of leather-bound volumes. But Grace's trained eye caught something the architects probably thought no one would notice: the slight gap where the shelf didn't quite meet the wall, the faint scratches on the floor where something heavy had been moved. "Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong?" The little girl spun around, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks. "I heard her voice," she whispered. "I heard Mama's voice, and I tried to find where it was coming from, but I can't. Grace's heart clenched. "What do you mean you heard her voice?" "Sometimes when the house is really quiet, I hear singing, like a lullaby, but when I try to find it, it stops." Emma's voice broke. "Daddy says Mama is gone forever, and I'm not supposed to think about her because it makes me weak. But I miss her so much, it hurts in my chest." Grace knelt down and pulled the sobbing child into her arms. For the first time since arriving, she held one of the Hassan children while they cried, really cried, without trying to shush them or hurry them through their pain. "Missing someone. You love doesn't make you weak, baby," Grace whispered. "It makes you human." After Emma fell asleep that afternoon, Grace returned to the library. She examined the bookshelf more carefully, running her hands along the edges until she found it. A small, barely visible button hidden behind a leather volume of Shakespeare. When she pressed it, a section of the shelf swung inward on silent hinges. Behind it was a room that didn't exist on any floor plan. The hidden space was small but carefully arranged, like a shrine. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them. A beautiful woman with laughing eyes, olive skin, and long dark hair in various stages of life. Wedding photos showing her dancing with Omar, both of them radiant with joy. Pictures of her pregnant, glowing with happiness. Images of her holding newborn Emma, then toddler Lucas. Family vacations, birthday parties, quiet moments at home, but it was the corner of the room that made Grace's breath catch. There sat a vintage record player, its arm positioned over a vinyl album. Beside it, dozens of records were neatly organized: lullabies in Arabic, French children's songs, American folk tunes. Grace lifted the needle and gently placed it on the record. A woman's voice filled the small space, soft and melodic, singing a lullaby in Arabic. The same voice Emma had been hearing through the walls. The record player had been running on a timer. Grace realized, somewhere in this mansion's complex, automated systems, Omar Hassan had programmed his dead wife's voice to play at random intervals, but only in this locked room where no one was supposed to hear it. Grace sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the tragedy of it all. This man had built a shrine to his wife's memory, preserved every photograph, kept her voice alive through music. But he'd locked it all away, forbidden his children from accessing the very comfort he desperately needed himself. She spent an hour in that room, studying the photographs, listening to recordings of bedtime stories and lullabies. The woman's name, Grace learned from inscriptions on photo frames, was Layla Hassan. She had been a music therapist who worked with children, a woman whose entire life seemed dedicated to bringing joy and healing to others. There were journals too, leather-bound books filled with Layla's handwriting. Grace opened one dated 3 months before Emma's birth. "Omar is so worried about becoming a father, afraid he'll be like his own dad, distant, cold, focused only on business. I keep telling him that love isn't something you learn from textbooks or acquire through success. It's something you give freely without fear of loss. I hope our children will teach him that." Another entry, written when Lucas was 2. "Watched O reading bedtime stories tonight. He does all the voices, makes the children laugh until their bellies hurt. He's nothing like he thinks he is, nothing like his father was. Our children adore him, and he's finally starting to see himself through their eyes instead of through His fear. The final entry was dated just weeks before Layla's death. If something happens to me, I hope Omar remembers what I've tried to teach him. That grief shared is grief halved, but grief hidden becomes a poison that spreads through generations. Our children will need to cry, to remember, to celebrate my life as much as they mourn my death. Please, God, don't let him lock love away. In the name of protection, Grace closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Layla Hassan had known her husband well enough to predict exactly what he would do, and had begged him not to do it. That evening, Grace made a decision that would change everything. She waited until the children were asleep and Omar was in his home office, working late as he always did. She knocked on his door and entered without waiting for permission. "We need to talk about Layla." Omar's head snapped up from his laptop, his face immediately hardening. "I don't discuss my personal affairs with employees." I found the room. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked not like a billionaire CEO, but like a lost, frightened man. "You had no right—" "Emma hears her mother's voice through the walls," Grace interrupted. "She's been trying to find the source of the music for months, crying herself to sleep because she thinks she's going crazy." Omar stood abruptly, turning toward the windows that overlooked the city. "That room is private. That room is a prison," Grace said firmly. "For her memory and for your children's hearts." "You don't understand," Omar's voice was raw. "I built that room to preserve everything about her, every photograph, every recording, every memory, while forbidding your children from having any memories at all." He spun around, his eyes blazing. "I'm protecting them. Do you know what it's like to lose someone you can't live without? To have your entire world collapse in a single moment? I won't let them go through that pain. They're going through it anyway," Grace said quietly. "But they're going through it alone, and they're blaming themselves for feeling what's natural and human." Omar's anger seemed to deflate, leaving only exhaustion. "She died giving birth to complications from Emma's delivery. There were problems, bleeding that wouldn't stop. The doctors said if we'd chosen differently, if we hadn't tried. For a second child after Lucas, you blame yourself." "I killed her," he whispered. "My selfishness, my need for a bigger family. I killed the woman I loved more than life itself." Grace's heart broke for this man who had carried such devastating guilt for 4 years. Layla wrote in her journals that you were the most loving father she'd ever seen. She wrote about how proud she was of the man you'd become, how different you were from your own father. Omar's head shot up. "You read her journals?" "She knew you'd blame yourself. She wrote about it, worried about it, and she begged you not to let grief poison your children's ability to love and be loved." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the city 47 floors below. Then Omar sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know how to do this without her," he admitted. "I don't know how to be their father when I feel like I'm drowning every single day." Grace moved closer. "You start by letting them know their mother existed, by sharing her love instead of hoarding it, by grieving together instead of suffering alone. What if they hate me for keeping her from them?" "Children don't hate parents for being imperfect," Grace said gently. "They hate parents for being absent. And you've been absent from their lives for 4 years, even while living in the same house." Omar looked up at her, his eyes red with unshed tears. "I used to read them bedtime stories. Before she died, I used to do voices, make them laugh. But after the funeral, every time I looked at Emma, I saw Layla. Every time Lucas asked for Mama, I felt like I was dying all over again." "So you stopped looking, you stopped listening, you turned being a father into a job instead of a relationship." He nodded, the admission clearly painful. Grace sat down across from him. "Your wife left you a roadmap for healing. It's all there in her journals, her recordings, her photographs. She knew you'd struggle, and she left you everything you need to find your way back to your children. I don't know if I can—" "You don't have to do it alone." Grace said, but you do have to do it. Because right now, your children think love is dangerous, that caring means losing, that showing emotion makes them weak. Is that the legacy you want to leave them? Omar was quiet for a long time, staring at a framed photo of Emma and Lucas on his desk, one of the few pictures of his children he'd allowed himself to keep visible. What do I do? He finally asked. Tomorrow is Saturday, Grace said. Tomorrow you show them the room. You tell them about their mother. You let them cry and you cry with them. You start healing together. As Grace left his office that night, she knew she'd crossed a line that might cost her this job. But some things were more important than employment. Some children were worth fighting for. What she didn't know was that her intervention would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to her leaving the Hassan house forever, and to the discovery that would bring Omar Hassan to his knees. Saturday morning arrived grey and drizzling, matching the mood that hung over the Hassan penthouse like a storm cloud. Grace woke early, her stomach churning with nervous energy. Today would either mark the beginning of this family's healing or the end of her time with them. She found Omar in the kitchen at 6 a.m., still wearing yesterday's clothes, a cold cup of coffee growing stale in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "I've been thinking all night," he said without looking up. "Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe some things are better left buried." Grace poured herself tea and sat across from him. "Your daughter thinks she's losing her mind because she hears her mother's voice through the walls. Your son hides her picture under his mattress like it's something shameful. They're already living with the truth, Omar. They're just living with it alone. What if I break down in front of them? What if I can't handle seeing them hurt?" "Then you'll break down," Grace said simply. "And they'll see that their father is human, that grief doesn't make you weak, and that love is worth the pain it sometimes brings." Omar finally met her eyes. "How do you do it? How do you carry missing your own children every day and still function?" Grace smiled sadly. "I don't carry it alone. I write to them, call them, share my feelings with friends back home. Pain shared is pain halved, but pain hidden grows like cancer." An hour later, Emma and Lucas were sitting at the breakfast table, picking at their pancakes and shooting curious glances at their father, who hadn't left for the office as he usually did on Saturdays. "Dad," Emma ventured, "are you sick?" Omar cleared his throat. "No, sweetheart. I wanted to spend the day with you both, all of us together." Lucas looked suspicious. "Why?" It was a fair question. Omar had spent 4 years treating family time like a scheduled business meeting, efficient, brief, and focused on practical matters. "Because I have something important to show you," Omar said. "Something I should have shared a long time ago." Grace watched from the kitchen doorway as Omar led his children to the library. His hands were shaking as he pressed the hidden button, and when the bookshelf swung open, both children gasped. "What is this place?" Emma whispered. Omar's voice was barely audible. "This is where I keep your mother." The next few hours were unlike anything the Hassan house had experienced in 4 years. Emma and Lucas explored the hidden room with wonder and tears, touching photographs as if they were precious artifacts, listening to their mother's recorded lullabies with the hunger of souls finally receiving nourishment. "She's so beautiful," Emma breathed, holding a wedding photo. "Why didn't you ever show us these?" Omar sat heavily in the room's single chair, watching his children discover their mother for what felt like the first time. "Because every time I looked at her pictures, I remembered that she died because of me." "What do you mean?" Lucas asked, still clutching a photo of Layla reading him a bedtime story, and so Omar told them the truth. About the complications during Emma's birth, about the choices that led to tragedy, about the guilt that had eaten away at him like acid for 4 years. He told them about their mother's work as a music therapist, about her love for children, about her dreams for their family. "She died bringing me into the world. Emma's voice was small, scared. She died bringing love into the world, Omar corrected, kneeling beside his daughter. You and Lucas were the greatest joys of her life. She used to say that having children was like giving pieces of your heart legs to walk around in the world. Grace watched from the doorway as this fractured family finally began to piece itself back together. She saw Emma curl into her father's lap for the first time in years while Lucas leaned against his shoulder, all of them listening to Layla's voice singing ancient Arabic lullabies. But it was what happened next that truly transformed everything. Lucas, emboldened by this new openness, asked the question that had been haunting him for years. "Daddy, why did you stop reading us bedtime stories?" Omar's face crumpled. "Because every story reminded me of her, every voice I did, every laugh I tried to create. It all felt like a lie when the most important person wasn't there to hear it." "But we were there," Emma said quietly. "We needed the stories too." The simple truth of it hit Omar like a physical blow. He had been so focused on his own pain that he'd forgotten his children were also in agony, also needed comfort, also deserved to have their grief acknowledged and their memories honored. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, pulling both children closer. "I'm so sorry I left you alone with your sadness." That afternoon, something remarkable happened. For the first time since Layla's death, Omar sat on Emma's bed and read her a story. He did all the voices, the brave knight, the wise dragon, the clever princess, just as he had years ago. Emma laughed, really laughed, and the sound echoed through the penthouse like music that had been missing for too long. Grace found Lucas in his room that evening, no longer hiding his mother's photo, but displaying it proudly on his nightstand. "Grace," he said, "do you think Mama would be proud of us for finding her again?" "I think she's been waiting for this day for 4 years," Grace replied. But even as the Hassan family began to heal, Grace could see new challenges emerging. Omar's business associates had started asking questions about his recent absence from important meetings. His assistant mentioned whispered concerns from board members about his emotional stability. And Grace herself was beginning to face scrutiny from people who wondered why a simple nanny had such influence over one of New York's most powerful men. The first warning came on Monday morning when Omar's brother-in-law, Richard Morrison, showed up unannounced at the penthouse. Richard was everything Omar had once been, cold, calculating, focused solely on business success. He'd married Layla's sister, but had never understood the warmth and emotional openness that ran in their family. "Omar, we need to talk," Richard said, barely acknowledging Grace's presence as she served coffee in the living room. "The children are getting ready for school," Omar replied. "Whatever it is can wait." "No, it can't. The board is concerned about your recent behavior, missing weekend calls with Tokyo, cancelling the merger meeting with the Steinberg Group, leaving the office early 3 days in a row. This isn't like you." Omar's jaw tightened. Maybe the old me wasn't worth being like. Richard's eyes flicked to Grace, then back to his brother-in-law. "I've been hearing things about inappropriate relationships with staff members, about someone overstepping their boundaries." Grace felt her cheeks burn, but she continued arranging items on the coffee table, pretending not to listen. "Be very careful about what you're implying." Omar's voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. This woman," Richard gestured dismissively toward Grace, "has been here less than a month, and already you're acting like a different person. Layla's been gone for 4 years, Omar. It's time to stop letting grief make you weak." The words hung in the air like poison. Omar stood slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Get out of my house! Omar, get out!" After Richard left, Omar found Grace in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she washed dishes that were already clean. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," he said. Grace turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Is that what people think? That we're... It doesn't matter what people think. It matters to me," Grace said firmly, "and it should matter to you. I won't be the reason your children lose their father again." "What do you mean?" Grace dried her hands slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I see how they look at you now, like you've come back from the dead. I see how you read to them, laugh with them, actually see them when they talk. But I also see the pressure building from your business world, the suspicion about my influence here. Grace, I'm a middle-aged African woman with no formal education, taking care of the children of one of New York's most eligible widowers," Grace continued. "People are going to talk, and when they do, it won't just hurt me. It'll hurt Emma and Lucas. They'll become the subject of gossip and speculation instead of children healing from trauma." Omar was quiet for a long moment. "So what are you saying?" Grace met his eyes steadily. "I'm saying that maybe my job here is almost done. You're connecting with your children again. They know about their mother. The healing has started, but they need you. Omar stopped himself. "You need to learn to do this without me," Grace said gently. "That's the only way it'll last." Neither of them realized that this conversation was the beginning of the end, or that Grace's eventual departure would leave behind something that would transform not just Omar's understanding of love, but his children's understanding of their place in the world. The seeds of change had been planted, but the most profound revelations were yet to come. The first photograph appeared in the New York Social Register 3 weeks later. It was innocent enough. Omar Hassan leaving his office building with his children, all 3 of them smiling, Emma holding his hand while Lucas carried a balloon from some afternoon adventure. The caption read, "Billionaire executive's new family. Focus, has grief finally given way to joy, given way to joy?" But embedded in the article were questions that made Grace's blood run cold. Sources close to the Hassan family report a dramatic change in the notoriously private businessman's behavior, coinciding with the recent hiring of a new childcare provider. While Hassan Global Properties stock continues to perform well, board members privately express concern about their CEO's shifting priorities. Grace found the article on Omar's desk when she brought him his morning coffee. He was staring at it, his jaw clenched. "It's starting," he said without looking up. "What's starting?" "The scrutiny. The questions." Richard wasn't making idle threats. Omar pushed the paper away. "They've hired a private investigator." Grace felt the world tilt. "What?" "Someone's been asking questions about you, about your background, your employment history, your family in Ghana. They want to know why a man who hasn't taken a personal day in 4 years suddenly starts leaving work early to attend school plays and piano recitals." Grace sank into the chair across from his desk. "I should go." "No." Omar's voice was firm. "I won't let them drive away the person who gave me my children back." But Grace could see the strain wearing on him. The late-night phone calls from board members, the questioning looks from business associates, the way his own family had started treating him like he was having some kind of breakdown. Even his household staff whispered when they thought no one was listening. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in November. Grace was helping Emma with her math homework when they heard shouting from Omar's study. Through the closed door, they could hear his voice raised in anger, then the sharp tones of what sounded like multiple men arguing back. "Stay here," Grace told Emma, but the little girl's face had already gone pale with the familiar fear that Daddy's anger meant Daddy might disappear again. Grace crept closer to the study door, her heart pounding. She could hear Omar's voice, strained and furious. "I don't care what the board thinks about my personal life. My children come first." "Your children aren't the issue, Omar." That was Richard Morrison's voice. "The issue is your judgment, your emotionally compromised, making decisions based on sentiment rather than sound business practices. What decisions? Omar demanded. You've missed 3 major acquisitions because you refused to travel. You turned down the Shanghai expansion because it would require 6 months overseas. You're letting a nanny dictate corporate policy. I'm choosing my children over money. Something you clearly can't understand. A new voice joined the argument. One, Grace recognized as Harrison Webb, chairman of Hassan Global's board of directors. Omar, we've been friends for 20 years. I watched you build this company from nothing, but this behavior isn't grief recovery, it's midlife crisis territory. The private investigator's report on your household staff raises serious questions about your judgment. Grace's stomach dropped. They had been investigating her. What kind of questions? Omar's voice was dangerously quiet. Questions about why a woman with no formal childcare training, no references from American families, and significant financial obligations back home was given such unprecedented access to your personal life. Questions about large cash withdrawals from your personal accounts that coincide with her employment. Questions about whether you're being manipulated by someone who has everything to gain from a wealthy widower's emotional vulnerability. The silence that followed was deafening. Grace backed away from the door, her hands trembling. They thought she was a gold digger. They thought she was taking advantage of Omar's grief to extract money from him. They thought she was the predator. In this story, she found Emma and Lucas huddled together on Emma's bed, listening to the angry voices echoing through the penthouse. "Is Daddy going to send you away like the other nannies?" Lucas asked, his voice small. Grace's heart shattered. "I don't know, sweetheart. Please don't go," Emma whispered. "Daddy is happy when you're here. We're all happy." Grace pulled both children into her arms, fighting back tears. How could she explain that sometimes love meant leaving? That sometimes protecting the people you cared about meant sacrificing your own happiness? The shouting in the study continued for another hour. When it finally stopped, Grace heard multiple sets of footsteps heading toward the elevator. She waited until the house was quiet again before venturing out to find Omar. She found him in the hidden room, sitting among the photographs of Layla, his head in his hands. "They want me to fire you," he said without looking up. Grace nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I know. They've made it clear that if I don't, they'll call for a vote of no confidence. They'll remove me as CEO of my own company. And if you lose the company, then I lose everything: the house, the trust funds for the children's education, their security, their future. Everything Layla and I built for them." Grace sat down beside him. "So you'll fire me?" Omar finally looked at her, his eyes red with exhaustion and pain. "I can't. You're the reason my children are alive again. You're the reason I remember what it feels like to be a father instead of just a provider. But you can't keep me either." They sat in silence among the photographs and memories, both of them understanding that they had reached an impossible crossroads. "There might be another way," Grace said finally. "What do you mean?" Grace took a deep breath. "What if I quit? What if I leave on my own terms before you're forced to fire me? Then you keep your company, your children keep their security, and everyone gets what they want. Except you, and except Emma and Lucas, who will be devastated." "Children are more resilient than we think," Grace said softly. "And you're their father now. Really their father, in a way you haven't been since Layla died. They don't need me anymore. They need you, and you finally know how to be what they need." Omar was quiet for a long time. "When would you go?" "Soon. Before this gets worse, before the children become the center of a scandal that follows them for the rest of their lives." "Grace," Omar's voice broke, "I don't know how to thank you for what you've given us." "You don't need to thank me," Grace replied. "You need to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't hide again. Promise me you'll keep reading them bedtime stories, attending their school events, being present in their lives. Promise me you won't let grief or guilt or business pressure turn you back into the ghost you were when I arrived." Omar nodded, tears finally falling. "I promise." What neither of them realized was that Grace had already begun working on something that would ensure that promise was kept. Something that would provide Emma and Lucas with a foundation of love and security that would last long after she was gone. Over the next few days, Grace began making preparations. She wrote letters to her children in Ghana, explaining that she would be coming home soon. She contacted the employment agency about potential new positions. She carefully saved every penny of her salary, knowing that her next job might not pay. As well, but most importantly, she began working on her final gift to the Hassan family. Something that would take weeks to complete, something that would change their lives forever, something that would ensure her sacrifice meant something lasting and beautiful. The children sensed something was changing. Emma became clingy, following Grace around the house. Lucas started having nightmares again. Both of them seemed to understand that their newly reconstructed world was about to shift once more. But Grace was determined that this time, when the change came, it would leave them stronger rather than broken. This time, when someone they loved had to leave, it would be because love sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice, and because the greatest gifts are often left behind by those who care too much to stay. Grace's final gift began with a single phone call to Ghana, made from a payphone 6 blocks from the Hassan building at 2 in the morning. She couldn't risk using the house phone or her cell. Too many people were watching, listening, waiting for any sign of impropriety. "Sarah, it's Mama." Her daughter's voice, warm and surprised, flooded the line. "Mama, it's so late there. Is everything okay?" "I need you to do something for me, baby. Something important." Over the next 20 minutes, Grace explained her plan to her eldest daughter, the medical student who had inherited her mother's determination and her father's technical skills. By the end of the call, Sarah was crying. "Mama, you're giving them everything. What about you? What about us?" "This isn't about money, Sarah. This is about children who need to know they're loved unconditionally. Sometimes that's worth more than any salary. But the materials, the equipment, the time, this will cost everything you've saved." Grace smiled in the darkness of the phone booth. "Then it's a good thing love doesn't require a budget." What Grace was planning had never been done before in her experience, but she had watched Layla Hassan's recorded therapy sessions with children, studied her techniques, and understood the profound healing power of music combined with memory. If she was going to leave Emma and Lucas, she would leave them with something that would continue her work long after she was gone. The next morning, Grace called in a favor from her cousin Marcus, who worked in digital media production in Brooklyn. She met him at a small cafe in Queens, away from Manhattan's watching eyes. "Grace, this is incredibly ambitious," Marcus said, reviewing the note she'd written. "You're talking about weeks of work, professional-grade equipment, studio time." "How much?" Marcus calculated quickly. "For everything you want, at least $8,000, maybe 10. Grace had saved exactly $9,200 during her time with the Hassans. Her entire nest egg meant to help her start over after this job ended. "I'll pay it." "Grace, are you sure? This will leave you with nothing." She thought about Emma's laughter when her father read bedtime stories, about Lucas proudly displaying his mother's photograph, about Omar's transformation from a ghost into a father. "I'm sure." Over the next 3 weeks, Grace led a double life. During the day, she cared for Emma and Lucas, helped them with homework, prepared meals, and maintained the routine that had brought stability back to their lives. But every evening, after the children were asleep and Omar was working in his study, she slipped out of the penthouse and took the subway to Brooklyn. In Marcus's studio, she worked until dawn on her secret project. She recorded herself reading every children's book Emma and Lucas loved, using all the voices and inflections she'd learned, made them smile. She recorded lullabies in English, French, and her native Twi, songs that could comfort them through any nightmare or lonely night. But the most ambitious part of her project was the interactive component. Using technology Marcus had developed for therapeutic applications, Grace was creating something unprecedented, a digital memory system that would preserve not just her voice, but her presence. "Explain to me again how this works," Grace said. "Watching Marcus adjust levels on a complex recording setup, you're creating multiple response tracks," Marcus explained. "When a child says they're sad, the system recognizes the emotion and plays your appropriate comfort response. When they're excited about something, it plays your celebration response. It's like having an AI version of yourself that can respond naturally to their needs." Grace nodded, understanding. "So even when I'm gone, they'll know someone is listening, someone cares about their feelings." "Exactly. But Grace, this technology is experimental. We're using voice recognition, emotional analysis, natural language processing. This is cutting-edge stuff." What Grace didn't tell Marcus was that she was also incorporating something else into the system. Every story Layla Hassan had recorded, every lullaby, every word of comfort. She was creating a bridge between the mother who had been lost and the children who still needed her, with herself as the conduit between past and present. The work was exhausting. Grace functioned on 3 hours of sleep, fueled by coffee and determination. She lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes, but continued recording session after session. "I want to record different responses for when they're older too," she told Marcus during one late-night session. "Guidance for teenage problems, encouragement for college applications, comfort for heartbreak, everything a mother figure would provide as they grow up." "Grace, you realize this could take months to complete properly." "I don't have months. I need to finish this before I leave." Meanwhile, the pressure at the Hassan house continued to mount. Omar's business associates had begun making not-so-subtle threats about restructuring his responsibilities if his personal distractions continued to affect his professional performance. Grace overheard phone calls where board members questioned whether grief had permanently damaged his judgment. The children sensed the tension. Emma started having trouble sleeping again, often padding to Grace's room in the middle of the night. "Grace, are you going to leave us?" Grace would hold the little girl close, breathing in her strawberry shampoo scent, memorizing the weight of her small body curled against her chest. "Sweetheart, sometimes people have to go away, but that doesn't mean they stop caring. Love doesn't end just because someone isn't in the same house anymore. But I don't want you to go. We were just starting to be happy again. And you'll keep being happy," Grace promised. "Your daddy loves you so much, and he's learned how to show it now. You have each other, and you have all your mama's love that we discovered together." But Emma wasn't the only one struggling with the impending change. One evening, Grace found Lucas in the hidden room, surrounded by his mother's photographs and recordings. "Lucas, what are you doing, baby?" "Trying to memorize everything," he said, without looking up. Mama's voice, her face, all the stories. "Because when you leave, what if Daddy gets sad again and locks this room back up?" Grace's heart broke. This 7-year-old boy was already anticipating loss, already trying to hoard love against future abandonment. She knelt beside him. "Lucas, look at me." He turned, his dark eyes so much like his father's, filled with wisdom no child should possess. "Your daddy isn't the same man who locked this room 4 years ago. He's learned that hiding love doesn't protect it. It just makes it disappear. He won't lock this room again because he understands now that memories need to be shared to stay alive." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen him change. I've seen him choose you and Emma over everything else. His business meetings, his sleep, his fear of being hurt again. He chose love, Lucas, and people who choose love don't go back to choosing fear. That night, Grace made a decision that would accelerate her timeline. She called Marcus. "I need to finish the recordings this week." "Grace, that's impossible. We need at least this week, Marcus, whatever it takes." For the next 5 days, Grace barely slept. She recorded morning greetings and bedtime prayers, words of encouragement for difficult days, and celebrations for victories both big and small. She recorded responses to hundreds of potential scenarios: first days of school, friendship troubles, academic struggles, teenage rebellion, first heartbreaks, graduation speeches. She was creating a lifetime of mothering, compressed into digital form. On Friday night, as she finished the last recording session, Grace looked exhausted but determined. "The installation?" she asked Marcus. "I can have it set up in their playroom this weekend while the family is out. But Grace, are you sure you want to spend your final days here setting this up instead of saying goodbye?" Grace smiled. The first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her in weeks. "This is how I say goodbye. This is how I make sure they know that leaving doesn't mean abandoning." What Grace didn't know was that Omar had already set the date for her departure. The board had given him an ultimatum. Grace Williams would be gone by the end of the month, or he would be removed as CEO. He had chosen his children's future security over his own happiness, just as Grace had known he would. But he also didn't know about the gift Grace was preparing, the gift that would ensure her love remained present in his children's lives long after she returned to Ghana. In 3 days, Grace Williams would leave the Hassan penthouse forever. But what she left behind would prove that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go and making sure that love continues even in absence. The installation happened on a Saturday morning while the Hassan family attended Emma's piano recital at her private school. Grace had arranged for Marcus and his technical team to have exactly 3 hours to set up the system in the children's playroom before the family returned. Grace herself wasn't there to supervise. She couldn't risk being absent from Emma's performance. It might be the last time she would sit in an audience watching the little girl she'd come to love like her own daughter. At the recital, Grace sat in the back row while Omar and the children occupied seats in the front. Emma played Chopin's Minute Waltz with surprising skill for an 8-year-old, her small fingers dancing across the keys with the confidence that had bloomed since her father started attending her performances. Grace watched Omar's face as he listened to his daughter play. 6 months ago, he would have been checking his phone, mentally reviewing business deals, present in body but absent in spirit. Now he leaned forward in his seat, his eyes never leaving Emma's focused expression, his lips moving silently as if he were playing along with her. When Emma finished, she looked directly at her father before acknowledging the applause. Omar stood immediately, clapping with the enthusiasm of a man who had finally learned that his children's achievements mattered more than stock prices or board meetings. "She's gotten so much better," Grace whispered to herself, tears threatening. After the recital, Emma ran to them both, her face glowing with pride and excitement. "Did you hear? I didn't miss a single note." "You were magnificent," Omar said, sweeping her into a hug that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. Emma turned to Grace. "Did you like it? Did I make you proud?" Grace knelt down to Emma's level, memorizing every detail of her radiant face. "I've never been more proud of anyone in my entire life." On the drive home, Lucas chatted about the other performances while Emma hummed her piece under her breath. Omar caught Grace's eye in the rearview mirror and smiled, a sad, knowing smile that acknowledged this might be one of their last family outings together. When they arrived at the penthouse, Grace's heart was pounding. Marcus should have finished the installation by now, but there was no way to know if everything had worked properly without testing it. "Grace, "Can you help me with my math homework?" Lucas asked as they entered the apartment. "In a little while, sweetheart. Why don't you and Emma go play in your playroom first? I need to talk to your father about something." The children scampered off toward their playroom while Grace and Omar stood in the hallway, both of them tense with anticipation. "What if they don't understand?" Omar asked quietly. "What if this just confuses them or makes them more upset about you leaving?" "Then we'll explain it together," Grace replied. "But Omar, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Don't let them become afraid of technology because of this. Don't let them think machines can replace human love. This system is meant to supplement your presence, not substitute for it. They still need you to read them bedtime stories, to attend their recitals, to be their father in all the ways that matter." Omar nodded. "I understand." From the playroom, they heard Lucas's voice. "Emma, come look at this. There's something new in here." Grace and Omar hurried toward the playroom, arriving to find both children standing before a sleek, modern console that had been seamlessly integrated into their play area. The screen displayed a gentle, welcoming interface with the words, "Hello, Emma and Lucas," in soft, child-friendly fonts. "What is it?" Emma asked, approaching the device cautiously. The system's sensors detected her presence and voice, immediately activating. Suddenly, Grace's face appeared on the screen. Not a photograph, but a live recording that seemed to be speaking directly to Emma. "Hello, my beautiful Emma," the recorded Grace said warmly. "You must have just gotten home from your piano recital. I'm so proud of how hard you've been practicing." Emma gasped, reaching toward the screen. "Grace, how are you in there?" "The real." Grace stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is my gift to you and Lucas. It's a way for me to stay with you, even when I can't be here in person." Lucas approached the console, his scientific mind immediately curious. "How does it work?" The system responded to his question. Grace's recorded voice explaining in child-appropriate terms. "It's like having a very smart computer that remembers everything I want to tell you. Whenever you need someone to talk to, whenever you're happy or sad or scared or excited, you can come here, and I'll be here to listen." Omar watched in amazement as his children interacted with the system. They asked questions, shared feelings, and received appropriate personalized responses that sounded exactly like Grace's natural conversational style. "I'm sad because I have a hard test next week," Emma told the screen. "Oh, sweetheart," the system Grace responded. "Tests can feel scary, but remember, you're smart and capable, and you've prepared well. Would you like me to help you practice? Or would you prefer if I told you about the time my daughter Sarah was nervous about her first big exam? Tell me about Sarah." As the system began sharing a story about Grace's own daughter overcoming academic anxiety, Omar pulled the real Grace aside. "This is incredible," he whispered. "But how is it responding so naturally? It's like you're actually in there having a conversation with them." Grace smiled sadly. "I recorded hundreds of hours of responses to every situation I could imagine them facing, from childhood through their teenage years. The system uses voice recognition and emotional analysis to choose the most appropriate response. It's programmed with everything I know about child psychology, everything I learned from watching Layla's therapy sessions, and everything I've learned about Emma and Lucas specifically." "But that must have cost." "Everything I had," Grace admitted, "but they're worth everything I had." Over the next hour, Emma and Lucas explored their new system with wonder and delight. They discovered that it could tell them stories, help with homework, provide comfort during nightmares, and even play recordings of their mother singing lullabies. But the most remarkable feature revealed itself when Lucas began crying about Grace's impending departure. "I don't want you to go," he sobbed to the screen. The system's Grace responded with perfect empathy. "I know, my sweet boy. I don't want to leave you either. But sometimes people who love each other have to be apart for a little while. That doesn't mean the love goes away. It just means the love has to be stronger and more creative. But what if I forget what you look like? What if I forget your voice? That's why I'm here in this special place, the system Grace explained. Whenever you want to see me or hear me, you can come here. And whenever you need a hug, you can close your eyes and remember all the hugs I've given you, because those hugs live in your heart now. Emma joined her brother in front of the screen. Will you remember us when you go back to Ghana? I will remember you every single day for the rest of my life, the system responded. You two are written on my heart in letters that will never fade. That evening, after the children were asleep, Omar found Grace packing her few belongings. In her small staff room. When? He asked simply. Tomorrow, Grace replied. I've booked a flight back to Accra. It's better to do this quickly, cleanly. Long goodbyes just make it harder for everyone. Omar sat heavily on the room's single chair. I keep thinking there should be another way, some solution I haven't considered. There is no other way, Grace said gently. You know that. Your board was never going to accept my presence here, and I was never going to let your children lose their security because of me. They're going to be devastated. They're going to be sad, Grace corrected. There's a difference. Sadness heals. Devastation destroys. These children have learned how to grieve healthily, how to love without fear, how to trust that caring for someone doesn't guarantee abandonment. They'll miss me, but they won't be broken by my leaving. Omar looked at her with something approaching awe. How did you become so wise about love and loss? Grace smiled, folding her last dress into her suitcase. By loving deeply and losing much. By learning that the only way to survive heartbreak is to let your heart break open instead of closed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of them understanding that this was goodbye for them as well. Grace, Omar said finally, I need you to know you didn't just save my children. You saved me too. You saved yourself, Grace replied. I just reminded you that you were worth saving. As Grace zipped her suitcase closed, she felt a mix of profound sadness and deep satisfaction. Tomorrow she would return to Ghana with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she had left behind something far more valuable than money. She had left behind love that would continue growing long after she was gone. What she didn't know was that her departure would trigger one final revelation that would change the Hassan family forever. Grace woke before dawn on Sunday, her last day in the Hassan penthouse. Her flight to Accra was scheduled for 6 p.m., giving her just enough time to say goodbye to the children and slip away before the emotional weight of parting became unbearable. She moved quietly through her morning routine, careful not to wake anyone. In a few hours, this would all be a memory. The marble floors, the view of Central Park, the sound of Emma's laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for so long. But as she zipped her final belongings into her carry-on bag, Grace noticed something that hadn't been there the night before. An envelope had been slipped under her door, her name written on it in elegant script. Inside was a letter from Omar, dated the previous evening. Dear Grace, by the time you read this, I will have already left for an emergency board meeting that was scheduled for 6 a.m. this morning. Richard Morrison called last night with what he termed final negotiations about your employment. I suspect this is their attempt to force a confrontation while you're packing to leave, to make me choose between you and the company one last time in front of witnesses. I wanted you to have this letter before that meeting, because regardless of what happens today, there are things you need to know. 6 months ago, I was a dead man walking. I functioned. I made decisions. I even occasionally smiled for photographs, but I had been dead inside since the day Layla died. I told myself I was protecting my children by keeping them at arm's length. But the truth was, I was protecting myself from facing their pain because I couldn't handle any more loss. You didn't just teach my children how to grieve, you taught me how to live again. You showed me that love doesn't make us weak, it makes us brave enough to risk being hurt. You proved that the best way to honor someone's memory isn't to lock it away, but to let it change you into someone worthy of that love. Emma plays piano now with confidence instead of desperation. Lucas asks questions about his mother without fear of making me angry. They laugh without looking over their shoulders to see if happiness is allowed. That's your gift to them, Grace. That's your gift to me. Whatever happens in today's meeting, I want you to know that you are not leaving because you failed. You are leaving because you succeeded too well. You made us a family again, and families protect each other, even when protection requires sacrifice. I have enclosed something I want you to have. Layla wrote it 6 months before she died, when she was pregnant with Emma. I found it yesterday while looking through her journals for anything that might help the children understand loss and healing. When I read it, I understood why you came into our lives when you did. Thank you for reminding me what it means to be a father. Thank you for showing my children what unconditional love looks like. Thank you for being brave enough to leave us so that we could keep what you've given us. With gratitude and respect, Omar Grace's hands trembled as she unfolded the second piece of paper. It was written in a different handwriting, flowing, feminine, clearly composed with great care. A prayer for my children's future. I don't know if I will live to see my children grow up. Pregnancy at my age, with my health complications, carries risks we can't ignore. So I write this now, while Emma moves inside me, and Lucas sleeps peacefully, in his crib, as a prayer for their future if I cannot be part of it. If I die, I know Omar will blame himself. He will try to carry the weight of my death along with the responsibility of raising our children alone. He will probably think that protecting them from pain means hiding from joy as well. I pray that when the darkness becomes too much for him to bear alone, someone will come into their lives who understands that healing requires connection, not isolation. Someone who knows that children need to grieve openly in order to love freely. Someone who will remind my husband that being a father means being present for both sorrow and celebration. I pray for a guardian angel who will arrive disguised as something ordinary, perhaps a teacher, a neighbor, a caregiver, someone Omar won't suspect of having the power to transform lives. Someone who will love my children not because it's convenient or profitable, but because that's what broken hearts do when they encounter other broken hearts. They help each other heal. I pray that this person will be strong enough to leave when their work is done, wise enough to know that the greatest acts of love sometimes require the deepest sacrifice. And I pray that my children will understand when that day comes that people don't leave because love ends. They leave because love demands they put someone else's needs before their own. If you are reading this, guardian angel, whoever you are, wherever you came from, thank you. Thank you for loving my babies when I couldn't. Thank you for showing them that they are worthy of care, attention, and devotion. Thank you for helping their father remember how to be human again. You are the answer to every prayer I said in those long nights when I felt my strength leaving me. You are the miracle I begged God to send if I couldn't stay to raise them myself. Please, don't ever doubt that your presence in their lives was meant to be. You are not a coincidence. You are a gift. Oh. With love and gratitude from a mother's heart, Layla Hassan Grace sank onto her bed, tears streaming down her face. She read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of meaning. Layla had somehow foreseen the exact situation that had brought Grace into their lives, down to the details about Omar's guilt, the children's need for open grieving, and even the eventual necessity of letting go. But it was the phrase, guardian angel, that undid her completely. Grace had never thought of herself as anything special, just a woman trying to survive, to provide for her family back home, to do right by the children in her care. Yet here was a mother's prayer, written years before Grace even knew the Hassan family existed, describing her arrival with startling accuracy. Grace looked around her small room one last time, seeing it now not as the servants' quarters where she had been relegated, but as the place where she had been temporarily stationed to complete a mission she hadn't even known she was on. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Installation complete, system tested and running perfectly. The children will always have a piece of your heart with them now. Another message came from her daughter Sarah in Ghana. Mama, your flight confirmation shows you land in Accra at 2 p.m. tomorrow. We'll be waiting for you at the airport. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. And then, unexpectedly, her phone rang. It was Omar. Grace, where are you right now? In my room, finishing packing. Omar, I read your letter. Listen to me carefully. Don't leave the penthouse. Don't go to the airport. Not yet. What's happened? The board meeting. It didn't go the way they expected. Richard and the others thought they could force me to choose between you and the company. They presented me with an ultimatum and demanded an immediate decision. Grace's heart sank. And I told them that any board that would ask a father to choose between his children's well-being and his business responsibilities was a board that didn't understand either fatherhood or leadership. I told them that Grace Williams had shown me what real success looks like. It's measured in children's laughter and bedtime stories and being present for the people who matter most. Omar, no, you can't sacrifice your company for— I didn't sacrifice anything, Omar interrupted. I offered to resign as CEO if they truly believed that having priorities beyond profit margins made me unfit to lead. I told them they could buy out my shares and find someone else to build their empire. Grace felt dizzy. What did they say? They backed down completely. Turns out that when faced with losing the man who built Hassan Global Properties from nothing, when confronted with having to find someone else capable of generating the returns I've produced for 20 years, suddenly, my personal distractions seem much more manageable. I don't understand. Grace, they need me more than I need them. I've been operating from fear of losing the company, losing financial security, losing control. But you taught me that the only thing worse than losing what you have is never really having it in the first place, because you're too afraid to live. Grace sat down hard, overwhelmed by the implications. So what happens now? Now you come home to a family that needs you. Now we stop letting other people's narrow-mindedness dictate how we live our lives. Now we show Emma and Lucas that sometimes standing up for what's right is more important than what's easy. But the scandal, the whispers, let them whisper, Omar said firmly. Let them talk about the billionaire who put his children first and the remarkable woman who saved his family. Let them wonder how we found the courage to choose love over reputation. That's a scandal I can live with. Grace looked at Layla's letter still clutched in her hand, at the words about guardian angels and answered prayers. Maybe this wasn't the end of her mission after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of understanding that some families are worth fighting for no matter what the world thinks. The children don't know you were planning to leave today, Omar continued. They think you're just having a quiet Sunday at home. What do you say we keep it that way? Grace smiled through her tears, looking at her packed suitcase and thinking about the family waiting for her in Ghana. They would understand. They had always understood that sometimes love requires you to stay exactly where you are. Grace stood in the penthouse living room, still holding Layla's letter, when she heard the elevator doors open. Omar's footsteps echoed across the marble floor, but they weren't alone. She could hear other voices, Emma and Lucas, chattering excitedly about something. "Grace," Emma called out. "Daddy took us to breakfast at that place with the pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, and he said we have a surprise for you." Grace quickly folded the letters and slipped them into her pocket just as the children burst into the room, their faces glowing with the kind of happiness she'd only seen glimpses of during her time here. Omar appeared behind them, But he wasn't alone. A woman Grace didn't recognize stood beside him, tall, elegant, with kind eyes and an expensive handbag clutched nervously in her hands. "Grace," Omar said, his voice carrying an emotion she couldn't identify. "I'd like you to meet someone very important. This is Dr. Rebecca Martinez. She was Layla's closest friend and colleague." Dr. Martinez stepped forward, extending her hand to Grace. "Ms. Williams, I've heard so much about you. Omar called me this morning after his board meeting. There's something we need to discuss, something about why you're really here." Grace shook the woman's hand, confused. "I'm here because I was hired to care for Emma and Lucas." "Yes," Dr. Martinez said gently, "but there's more to the story than any of us realized. May we sit down?" As they settled in the living room, Emma and Lucas flanked Grace on the sofa, both children sensing that something significant was happening, but not understanding what. Dr. Martinez opened her handbag and withdrew a manila folder. "Grace, what I'm about to show you may come as a shock. Before Layla died, she made arrangements, very specific arrangements, for her children's future care if anything happened to her." Omar leaned forward. "Rebecca, just tell her." Dr. Martinez opened the folder and handed Grace a document. "This is a letter Layla wrote to me 6 months before Emma was born. She asked me to hold on to it and only open it if she died in childbirth." Grace looked down at the familiar handwriting, the same flowing script she'd just finished reading in Layla's prayer for her children. "My dearest Rebecca, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true, and I am no longer here to raise my children. I need you to do something for me that may seem impossible, but I believe with all my heart that it's meant to be. In Ghana, in a small village outside Accra, there is a woman named Grace Williams. She has 3 children of her own and has spent years working as a caregiver to support them. She doesn't know me and I have never met her, but she is connected to my family in a way that defies explanation. Grace's youngest son, David, was treated at the Children's Hospital in Accra 3 years ago for a heart condition. The surgery was paid for by an anonymous donation through our family's charitable foundation, a donation I arranged after reading about his case in a medical journal Omar brought home from a conference. But that's not the connection I mean. Rebecca, I need you to find Grace Williams because she saved my life once, in a way she'll never know. During the darkest period of my own childhood, when my family fled Lebanon and came to America with nothing, we lived in a neighborhood in Detroit where an African woman named Ruth Williams, Grace's aunt, took care of refugee children while their parents worked multiple jobs. Ruth Williams fed me when my parents couldn't afford groceries. She helped me with English homework when my mother was too exhausted. She held me when I cried about the friends I'd left behind. She didn't have to care for me. I wasn't her responsibility. But she did it anyway, because that's what loving people do. I never forgot Ruth Williams, and I never forgot the promise I made to myself that if I ever had the power to help someone from her family, I would do it without question. Rebecca, if I die, I need you to find Grace Williams and offer her a position caring for my children, not as charity, not as repayment of a debt, but because I believe that love travels in circles. The care her aunt showed me as a frightened little girl needs to complete its journey by flowing to my own children. Don't tell Grace about this connection immediately. Let her prove herself first. Let her show you the same kindness, strength, and unconditional love that Ruth Williams showed me. And then, when the time is right, when she has already demonstrated that she was meant to be part of our family's story, tell her the truth. Tell her that she's not working for us. She's completing a circle of love that began 30 years ago, in a small apartment in Detroit, when her aunt chose to care for a lost Lebanese girl who had nothing to offer in return. I know this sounds like destiny or fate or something too good to be true, But Rebecca, I've learned that love creates its own logic, its own connections, its own miracles. Grace Williams belongs in my children's lives because her family has already been part of mine. Find her. Bring her home to us. With all my love. Layla Grace's hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the letter. Aunt Ruth, she whispered. You knew my Aunt Ruth. Dr. Martinez nodded, tears in her eyes. Layla talked about her constantly. Your aunt essentially raised Layla for 2 years, while her parents worked 3 jobs each, trying to establish themselves in America. Ruth Williams was the reason Layla survived that transition, the reason she learned to see America as home instead of exile. But that means... Grace's voice trailed off as the implications sank in. Omar moved to sit beside her. It means you weren't hired randomly. It means Layla spent years looking for ways to repay your family's kindness. It means, when she was dying, the first thing she thought of was making sure her children would be cared for by someone from the family that had cared for her. Emma looked up at Grace with wide eyes. Your aunt took care of Mama when Mama was little like me. Grace nodded, unable to speak. Lucas processed this information with his usual scientific precision. So Mama wanted you to come take care of us. Because your family took care of her first? Yes, sweetheart, Dr. Martinez said gently. Your mama believed that kindness travels in circles, and she wanted to make sure the circle was completed. Grace finally found her voice. The job offer that came through the agency, I arranged it, Dr. Martinez confirmed. It took me 6 months to locate you after Layla died. The agency thought they were fulfilling a standard placement request. They had no idea they were part of Layla's final gift to her children. Omar took Grace's hand. Do you understand what this means? You weren't just hired to care for my children. You were chosen by their mother before they were even born. Everything that's happened, your arrival, the way you've connected with Emma and Lucas, the way you've helped us heal, it was all part of Layla's plan. Grace thought about the letter in her pocket, Layla's prayer for a guardian angel. She thought about Aunt Ruth, who had died 5 years earlier, but had apparently set this entire story in motion decades ago through simple acts of kindness to a frightened refugee child. There's something else, Dr. Martinez continued. The anonymous donation that paid for your son David's heart surgery, that was Layla too. She'd been tracking your family situation for years, waiting for an opportunity to help. When she learned about David's condition, she saw it as a chance to begin repaying the debt she felt she owed your family. Grace's world tilted completely. David's surgery. We never knew who. Layla insisted on anonymity. She didn't want gratitude or recognition. She just wanted to help the family that had helped her. Emma tugged on Grace's sleeve. Grace, does this mean you're not really our nanny? Are you something else? Grace looked down at the little girl who had become so precious to her, then at Lucas, whose serious eyes were trying to process this revelation, then at Omar, who was watching her with an expression of wonder and gratitude. I think, Grace said slowly, this means I'm exactly who I was always supposed to be. I'm the person your mama chose to love you when she couldn't be here to do it herself. Omar stood up suddenly. Grace, there's one more thing. Something I decided during the board meeting this morning. He walked to his briefcase and withdrew. A legal document. I've been thinking about what you said, about how children need security, stability, family. And I realized that after everything you've given us, everything you've sacrificed, offering you employment isn't enough. Grace looked at the document he handed her, her eyes widening as she read the header. Adoption petition, State of New York. I want to make this official, Omar said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to adopt you as family, Grace, not as an employee, not as hired help, but as the person Layla chose to help raise her children. I want Emma and Lucas to have the security of knowing that the woman who loves them like a mother will always Be their legal guardian if anything happens to me. Grace stared at the papers, overwhelmed. Omar, I can't. This is what Layla wanted, Dr. Martinez said softly. She wrote about this possibility too. She hoped that whoever came to care for her children would become so much more than a caregiver, that they would become genuine family. Emma and Lucas looked between the adults, sensing the magnitude of what was happening. Does this mean Grace would really be our family forever? Emma asked. It means, Omar said, kneeling down to his children's level, that Grace would officially be what she's already become. Someone who will always love you, always be there for you, always be part of our family no matter what. Grace looked around at the faces surrounding her, Emma and Lucas, hopeful and trusting, Omar, grateful and determined, Dr. Martinez, smiling through tears of joy. She thought about Aunt Ruth, about Layla's extraordinary plan, about the miraculous way love had traveled across continents and decades to bring her to this moment, and she realized that sometimes the most profound gifts we leave behind aren't things at all. They're the connections we create, the love we set in motion, the circles we help complete. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, I want to be your family. As Emma and Lucas launched themselves into her arms, Grace understood that this was what Layla's final letter had really been about. Not just finding someone to care for her children, but creating a family that would honor both the love that had been lost and the love that was yet to come. 1 year later, Grace Williams Hassan stood in the same penthouse living room where her journey had begun. But everything had changed. The marble floors still gleamed. The view of Central Park remained breathtaking, but the silence that had once suffocated this home had been replaced by something far more precious, the sound of a family living fully. Emma, now 9, practiced piano in the music room that had been converted from Omar's rarely used formal dining space. The melodies drifted through the apartment, no longer the desperate attempts to please an absent father, but joyful expressions of a child who knew she was heard and celebrated. Lucas, 8 years old and endlessly curious, sat at the kitchen, counterworking on a science project about sound waves, inspired by the AI system Grace had created. He'd become fascinated with technology after learning how the interactive memorial worked, and Omar had arranged for him to take weekend coding classes. "Grace Mama," Lucas called out, using the name the children had naturally developed for her. "Can you help me understand how your computer system recognizes emotions in voices?" Grace smiled as she finished preparing dinner. The hyphenated name had emerged organically in the months following the adoption. The children needed to distinguish between their biological mother's memory and their present mother's presence, so Mama Layla and Grace Mama had become their way of honoring both women who loved them. "After dinner, sweetheart," Grace replied. "But remember, the most important thing isn't how technology recognizes feelings, it's how people do." Omar entered the kitchen, loosening his tie after another day of running Hassan Global Properties. But these days, he left the office at 5 o'clock sharp, attended every school event, and had turned down 3 major international deals that would have required extended travel. "How did the interview go today?" he asked, kissing Grace's cheek, a gesture that had evolved naturally from gratitude to genuine affection to something deeper that neither of them had explicitly named, but both acknowledged. Grace had been featured in several magazines over the past year as the story of the Hassan family's transformation became public. Rather than the scandal everyone had predicted, Grace's integration into their family had been celebrated as an inspiring example of unconventional love and healing. "The journalist from Family Circle was lovely," Grace replied. "She was particularly interested in the AI memorial system. Apparently, 3 other families have commissioned similar projects after reading about ours. That's wonderful, Omar said. Layla would have loved knowing her idea for preserving memory through technology was helping other families. It had taken months for Omar and Grace to comfortably discuss Layla's presence in their current life, but they'd learned that honoring the past didn't require avoiding it. Quite the opposite. Layla's photographs now hung openly throughout the apartment. Her recipes were still used in the kitchen, and her voice from the memorial system had become a comforting part of the children's bedtime routine. Speaking of Layla, Grace said, I received an interesting call today. Omar raised an eyebrow as he helped set the table. From whom? Dr. Martinez. She's been contacted by a family in Los Angeles, Lebanese immigrants whose daughter is struggling after losing her mother. They heard about our story and wondered if we might know of someone who could help them the way I helped. You. Omar paused in his task. What did you tell her? I told her I'd think about it. There's a woman in Ghana, a cousin of mine named Patience, who has experience with bereaved children. She's been wanting to come to America, and she has the same gift for healing that runs in our family. Another circle completing itself, Omar observed. Grace nodded. Aunt Ruth always said that love multiplies when you share it. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do, not just heal ourselves, but help others heal too. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. Grace, Mama, the AI system is asking for you. It says it has something important to share. Grace and Omar exchanged glances. The system had been programmed with thousands of responses, but occasionally it surprised them with combinations that seemed almost prophetic. In the playroom, the children gathered around the console as Grace's recorded image appeared on screen. But this wasn't one of the standard responses they'd heard before. My dear family, the AI Grace said, if you're seeing this message, it means a full year has passed since the system was activated. I programmed this special message to appear today, and I hope it finds you all healthy, happy, and together. The real Grace gasped. She'd forgotten about the anniversary message she'd recorded during those exhausting final sessions with Marcus. Emma, I hope you're still playing piano and that Daddy never misses your recitals. Lucas, I hope your curiosity about the world continues to grow. And Omar, the recorded Grace paused, her image seeming to look directly at him. I hope you've learned that being vulnerable doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. I hope you've discovered that the best way to honor Layla's memory is to live fully in the present she gave you. Emma wiped tears from her eyes. She knew we'd all be together for a whole year. Grace has always been good at seeing the future, Omar said softly, putting his arm around the real Grace's shoulders. The AI system continued, but this message isn't just about the past year, it's about all the years to come. This family was broken when I arrived, but you weren't destroyed. You were just scattered pieces waiting for someone to help you remember how to fit together. Lucas leaned against Grace's side. Are you really going to help other families too? Grace looked down at him. Would you like me to? Yes, Emma said immediately. Other kids need what you gave us. But you'll always come home to us, right? Lucas added. Always, Grace promised. This is my home. You are my family. Nothing will ever change that. Over dinner that night, they talked about the future. Grace's story had attracted attention from child psychology organizations, grief counseling centers, and technology companies interested in her innovative approach to memorial preservation. Several universities had invited her to speak about unconventional healing methods. I've been thinking, Omar said as they finished dessert, what if we formalized this? What if we created a foundation to help families dealing with loss and trauma? We could train caregivers, fund technology solutions, provide resources for healthy grieving. Grace's eyes lit up. The Layla Hassan Foundation for Family Healing, with Grace Williams Hassan as the director, Omar added. I like it, Emma said. Mama Layla would want to help other families, and Grace, Mama, knows how to do it. That night, after the children were asleep, Grace and Omar sat in the hidden room that was no longer hidden. The space had been transformed into a family meditation room, where they could go to remember Layla while celebrating their present blessings. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd actually left that day?" Grace asked. Omar considered. "The question. I think you would have found your way back to us eventually. Some connections are too strong to break." Grace picked up one of Layla's journals, reading a passage she'd marked months earlier. "Love doesn't end when someone leaves. It transforms into something new, something that can bridge any distance or overcome any obstacle." She was writing. "About death," Omar said, "but I think it applies to all kinds of leaving." "That's what I realized when I was packing to go," Grace admitted. "Even if I'd returned to Ghana, part of me would have stayed with you and the children forever. And part of you would have come with me." Omar nodded. "But I'm grateful we didn't have to test that theory." 6 months later, the Layla Hassan Foundation for Family Healing officially opened its doors. Grace's cousin Patience arrived from Ghana to begin training as a specialized grief counselor for immigrant families. 3 more AI memorial systems had been installed for families dealing with loss, each one customized with the same care and attention Grace had put into the original. Emma's piano skills had advanced to the point where she was performing in citywide competitions. Lucas had designed his own simple computer program to help children identify and express emotions. Omar had restructured Hassan Global Properties to prioritize family-friendly policies and charitable giving. And Grace had found her true calling, not just as a caregiver for one family, but as a healer who could help broken families rediscover their wholeness. The story that began with a simple job advertisement had become something none of them could have imagined, a testament to the power of love to transcend boundaries, overcome obstacles, and create connections that last forever. In the end, what Grace Williams left behind wasn't just an AI system or a transformed family. It was proof that sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most extraordinary acts of love, and that when we open our hearts to others, we don't lose ourselves. We discover who we were always meant to become. As Grace tucked Emma and Lucas into bed one evening, Emma asked the question that had become their nightly ritual. "Grace, Mama, will you tell us again how you found us?" Grace smiled, settling into the chair between their beds. "Well, once upon a time, there was a little girl in Detroit who was scared and far from home, and a kind woman named Ruth decided that love doesn't see color or country, it just sees children who need care." And as she told the story of how love travels in circles, completing itself across generations and continents, Grace knew that this moment, this family, this love, was what she would truly leave behind when her time came. The knowledge that every act of kindness creates ripples that can transform the world, one heart at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.